this edition of Collyer Bristow Conversations. Today we're joined by Michelle Pughe-Parry de Klerk, former hard news investigative journalist, former marketing and business development consultant, and entrepreneur, now the founder of the women's chapter. Welcome, Michelle. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me. It's always a pleasure to chat to you.
Oh, thank you. Well, perhaps let's kick off by you telling us a little bit about the women's chapter and what you guys do as part of that fantastic network.
Thank you, Chris. The women's chapter is a movement which champions women in business and women-led business. We started out as a networking platform, which was very much built on a need. I think with most businesses are built on the back of a need that the founder identifies. And in that case, it was my need for curated networking, profiling, and inspiration at a time that I really needed it from a career perspective. I was working as a marketing director, had come back from maternity leave, realized I needed to get myself back out there. And everything that I made the time to go to would just leave me feeling even more demotivated and uninspired than I'd felt before I went. And I think as many people will, it will resonate with them when you're time poor, you're managing a family and a home and a career. The things you make time to go to, you need to really be beneficial for you. Mm-hmm. And so I came up with this idea that if I couldn't find anything to go to that was suitable for me, that I should create my own. And it
true entrepreneur.
Yeah, well, and that's the thing, and because I think most of us realize that if we have a need and there's a problem that needs to be solved, we're not the only person that has that problem or that need. And there were very many of my sort of friends and peers at the same time who were going through similar phases from a kind of transition perspective in terms of their careers and just wanting more. And I think we should all unapologetically want more. And so the idea of the women's chapter really was to create a platform where we could bring like-minded women together, where they could connect, they could collaborate, they could inspire one another, we could learn together, but it also would give people the tools to grow their businesses. And we've evolved over the last 7 years from being very much an events-based business, a physical events-based business, to becoming a digital platform and home for women in business, and to really use that as a tool to champion women-led business. I'm very, very passionate about the power that women have as consumers. We hold 75% of consumer power globally, whether that be through the decisions we make in our homes or our businesses. So really, what underpins the passion of this community is thinking about how we really can support one another by using the power of our purses to support one another's businesses, one another's career journeys, and do that in a meaningful way. It's a way that really kind of gives each one of us an opportunity to support a fellow woman's journey.
So what sort of support can a new member of the women's chapter expect to receive? And have you got any examples of a female founded business that's used the platform to go on and have great success?
So I've structured our whole membership around with my consulting hat on, because I do run a consulting business separate to this, which is largely in the marketing and business development space, where I help brands to connect with clients and communities of clients, and to give them profiling and exposure. And so I created all of our benefits with that consulting hat on, because most of the brands in our community wouldn't have been able to afford my consulting services on an ongoing basis. But I looked at how we could create an offering that gave them a little bit of everything to help grow their businesses. So we have a community membership, which is free, and that's available to all women in business, regardless of whether they're professionals or founders. So they can come into our community, they can receive inspiration, they can attend our events. And then our founder community is our business membership, which has 2 tiers. That's for absolute startups, so businesses that just need a bit of profiling outside of their own website. They need another place to tell their story. We profile them on our platform, as well as across all of our social media channels and communication channels. And then the business members, which is kind of really where the value of our community comes into play. They get to connect with each other. We have monthly masterminds where we have, under Chatham House rules, we discuss various topics, we share insights, we ask for help. And then they also get the profiling piece as well. Because what I found was a lot of the women had invested a lot in setting up their own websites or e-commerce platforms. And it's a case of bootstrapping, you know, so you don't have £3,000 a month for a PR company, and you don't have you know, £2,000 a month for a digital marketing company to help you. So it's a case of trying to grow incrementally, whereas many of those brands really need a surge in growth. So we just thought our role is to provide them with this cushion of support where they have access to a community of like-minded people, but also where they have access to a little bit of profiling, a little bit of exposure, access to a community of like-minded women that want to support the growth of their business by buying their products and services.
So I guess a real benefit to your members is that actually they get to interact with people who have perhaps gone through similar experiences, or at that stage of growth they've gone through those same struggles, and so they can share their stories, share how they went through it, and I guess there's sort of an element of mentoring almost to it from people who have been through the same thing.
Yes, absolutely. But it's true peer-to-peer mentoring rather than you having a senior person coaching a junior person. It's really you know, day-to-day business, but where you've got the sounding board of people who have either been through that or might have a different perspective on what you're facing. And I think that's another real value of our community, is that it's very much cross-sector. So you get to bounce an idea of someone who operates in a different sector who may have a completely different approach to how they might solve that problem. And I think that's really where the power of the community, where you can see that. And you were asking about success stories, and I don't think I have a particular one. I think for me, the measure of success is very much seeing the community in action, and how when we have a mastermind, you know, it's not about me. It's about bringing people together where they are forming collaborations, they are partnering on social media initiatives, they're referring media contacts to one another. You know, they're very much, these are working groups that we come together to discuss real problems. And you know, and we've had tears, we've had laughter. Our masterminds are really, really valuable in that sense, that you can come and really let your hair down and ask for what you need. But equally, there's some weeks where people don't need anything and they just want to share a triumph or way that they navigated a problem. And I think, you know, particularly in terms of the obstacles that entrepreneurs and specifically women face in growing their businesses, is that lack of community and feeling very alone. And I think over the last 18 months, that's been exacerbated because people have felt even more alone. And I think that's where we've seen how the power of digital and video communication has really, you know, we've been forced to adopt it, but in many ways that's meant that people have been able to come together and hopefully feel less lonely.
I think that's an interesting point, because I think the life of an entrepreneur is often quite lonely, isn't it? And anyway, sort of irrespective of the pandemic, but that then just adds an extra layer on top. So having that community of peers to call upon, both to share the difficult parts, the struggle, but almost also to get excited and actually have somebody to talk to about the exciting bits, the successes, the triumphs. It must be really nice and really rewarding for you as well as the founder to see those conversations taking place. You started off by talking about need, about you created the women's chapter because of a need you saw. But what do you think are the differences between the needs of female entrepreneurs as opposed to male entrepreneurs, both in the way they operate and in terms of the resources and materials available to them?
So I think female entrepreneurs obviously face many of the same challenges that male entrepreneurs face. I don't think it's necessarily a gender discussion in that sense. However, there are things based on my own experience that I've seen in our community. There are some challenges that female entrepreneurs face. And I think one of the common themes, and I see this really often, is and I wouldn't say it's a lack of confidence. It's more around feeling like you need to be at a certain point before you have a real business.
Okay.
I hear a lot of women talking about, because their businesses have either grown out of a passion or a need, or it might have been at a certain stage in their life where they've created a brand that they wanted but didn't, that there was no access to it. Whether that be around a beauty product or a service, or maybe it was something child related. But I think a lot of the time women feel that they need to have proved themselves in some way in order to say they have a real business, or to even call themselves an entrepreneur. And I think there's a lot of snobbery around the concept of being an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And my message to women in business would, or who are starting a business, is to treat your business like a real business from the very beginning. Have your fundamentals in place, have agreements and contracts, have a lawyer, make sure you're taking yourself and your business journey seriously, because you're investing a lot of time and energy into it. And you don't need to be, there are no rules around what point you need to be at before you say that you have a real business. So I think that's definitely one of the obstacles that I've seen, whether it's an imposter syndrome around business stage, or feeling like you need to be turning over X amount before you can say that you now have a real business, as opposed to a lifestyle business. A business is a business. If you are able to generate an income, and you're putting food on the table, and you're supporting your family in a way that suits you, or you're supporting yourself in a way that suits you, you're in business. And I think that's, women-led businesses, we have the potential to add 250 billion pounds to the UK economy. And a lot of that's got to start with our own confidence around the contribution that we can make. And any contribution is a meaningful contribution. Doesn't mean you have to have £1 million turnover.
So really, it comes down to mindset, being confident, being backing yourself, essentially.
Backing yourself, and not waiting. I think I have a big problem with the word empowerment. And I think when we speak about women entrepreneurs, that word gets bandied around quite a lot, because essentially it suggests that somebody's going to give you the power. The power exists, it's there. We have everything we need to be successful. And if we don't have it, we need to go out and ask for it, because nobody is going to come and give you what you need. You've got to ask for it. So I think one of going back to your question about what are the key differences, I think sometimes there is an element of tenacity or risk taking. When women tend to shy away from that risk, or putting themselves out there, because they feel like they need to be at a certain point before anybody will take them seriously. And the same goes for going out and looking for funding. I think there are certain steps that we need to follow. Make sure the fundamentals of your business are in place, that you have a sound infrastructure. And that's regardless of how big you are, what your turnover is. You need to protect yourself from a legal perspective in terms of agreements, IP, contracts, whether that's working with a freelancer, or taking on your first employee, or just a supplier agreement. I know so many people who've been caught out in that sense, because they didn't think that what they were doing was worthy of that level of attention.
So what's next for the women's chapter? Where do you, so you're in the last 7 years or so, you've seen a huge growth in your membership, and you've as we've talked about, changed the structure of how you go about doing things, both as part of your plan and arising from the pandemic. So what's the next big thing for the women's chapter? What do the next 7 years hold?
Well, definitely continued global growth. We've had a lot of interest from different parties around a franchise model. So starting up physical pods of the women's chapter in different cities within the UK, but also abroad, and on different continents, which is really exciting. And I think, my vision for our community and our platform is to be seen as the ultimate resource to discover women-led businesses, but also for women-led businesses. And for people to come to be inspired, not only for their own sakes, but ultimately, I would love for our resource and our platform to become a place that young women and girls come to see real life success stories of what's possible if you align your passion with your purpose. Because I really do believe that. I believe you can make a business out of a passion if you apply basic fundamentals, and if you keep your wits about you, and you take kind of a logical approach to doing these things. Sometimes you have to make difficult decisions, and sometimes you might have to go, okay, you know what, this isn't going to work, but then it usually means there's some other route you can take. And I would love for young girls to be able to see that. I have 2 daughters myself, and I really want them to know that there's a plethora of career opportunities that exist for them. And hopefully in the self-employed space, where they can run their own businesses and be their own bosses, and captains of industry, as well as being really financially independent, which I think is very important for women today, to embrace and work toward financial independence in both their businesses and in their personal capacities.
You mentioned a second ago aligning passion with purpose. Do you think there's a fear amongst female entrepreneurs, or entrepreneurs in general, of turning that passion into a business, and the fear that actually doing it as a job as opposed to something you just enjoy might remove that enjoyment from it altogether?
That's a really good question. I think we spend so much time working. I think the best thing you could possibly build your career around is something that you feel very passionate about. But I equally think there are no rules. And if you reach a point where you fall out of love with what you're doing, you need to feel that you can make a change. You can make tweaks. You can go on a different career path. You mentioned when you introduced me that, I was a hard news journalist, and I've been a marketing director, and I've done loads of different things. And I spent a long time thinking that if anyone had to look at my CV, it would look like I didn't know what I wanted to do. And that you needed to have a really kind of linear career path. Whereas I think these days a portfolio career is a huge advantage, because it means you land up with all of these transferable skills. And I didn't know this at the time, but everything that I have done in my kind of corporate career has given me the skills and the knowledge to build a business. And if I haven't had the knowledge, I'm comfortable enough to be able to go and find people to ask the question, or to bring them in to help me, and surround myself with good people that do have the knowledge. So I think definitely build a business around a passion that you have, because we spend so much time working and investing ourselves. It has to be something that brings you joy. And if it stops giving you joy, take time out to figure out why and change it. I think the biggest thing that I've learned through running the women's chapter, running my own business, all of the members that are in our community, is that we have this idea that there are rules. Aside from kind of legal rules, from a society perspective that we're expected to adhere to, there aren't very many real rules. And my advice would always be, if you think that there's a rule, or you have this idea that you're supposed to do something in a certain way, stop yourself and ask the question, who made up that rule? Who said? And I'm always encouraging my own children to sort of be rule breakers in that sense, and to question. And I think that's something that entrepreneurs do. We question why things are done the way that they're done, and we come up with new ways to do them.
Well, that's really interesting, breaking the rules, because one of the questions I was going to ask next was, at what point do you think an entrepreneur should take the plunge and move from it being a side hustle into their full-time job, their full-time career? And I guess your advice there is, well, there are no rules. There is no set answer to that. It depends on the individual and where the business is at.
Yeah, I think, and interestingly, actually, we have that in our community. We have a lot of women who have transitioned from full-time professional careers to doing that with a side hustle, to then maybe going part-time with the side hustle, and then eventually making the shift to running their own businesses. And it's a terrifying shift. I did it myself. I fortunately was made redundant during my process. So I had one of those COVID kicks. And, you know, hindsight's always perfect sight, where you can turn around and go, oh, wow, okay, that was meant to happen, or that happened, and I wouldn't be where I am today if I hadn't had the shove. So I think having some, it's a challenge, particularly if you're on your own or you don't have a second income to rely on, to make that shift, because essentially you'd be giving up a comfortable monthly salary to then going it alone, where every month is different and you don't know. And I think especially in those early days, you are everything. You are sales, you are admin, you are marketing. And that can be really overwhelming, especially when it's only down to you to get money into your bank account. And as many people will know, when you first start out, and specifically if you're running a limited company, what you earn is not, you know, what you're bringing into the business is not what you earn. So it can be a really challenging time. I mean, I would say if anyone has an idea or there's something that they want to do for themselves, don't wait. Put the fundamentals in place. Do your research, demystify all of the financial jargon, and just start. And if that means having to do that while you still have another job, then that's okay. And you will eventually reach a point where your side hustle can no longer be a side hustle. It will be it will take more and more of your attention. And that will give you the confidence to take the plunge. But I would always say, you know, don't wait. And if your children want to run businesses, encourage them. If they want to start something, you know, don't deter them and tell them they're not old enough, or, you know, encourage them, because the time is now. And I think especially over what we've seen over the last 18 months, it's been a brilliant time to start a business, because we haven't had to commute. We've had a lot more time at home. Yes, we've had, particularly for women, a lot more domestic responsibilities, unfortunately. That has, you know, and I think some people have felt they've been thrust back into the 50s. But, you know, I think there's been a lot more headspace, and people have started to think about their mental health, their wellness, and questioning, wow, like, do I really love my job? And so the time is now. The time is always now. Start making the changes. Take the leap. It doesn't mean you have to chuck in your job and start something. You know, I mean, I would make sure that you've got a good concept. Ask people. And that's the other thing. Never being afraid to ask for help or to ask questions. Drive your family and your friends nuts with, you know, testing your product or service idea on them and saying, you know, what do you think of this? Do surveys. There are loads of things that you can do to prove your concept before, you know, going out and looking for funding. We've done a lot of kind of knowledge webinars and masterclasses and things around the funding piece, and we work with an amazing member in our community, Julie Elliott Brown, who runs Enter the Arena and helps women get funding ready. And what she always says, and I would totally agree with what I've seen in our community, is that you need to know ultimately what you want your business to be before you can work out what funding route is suitable for you. And equally, most people think they start a business and then they need to go out and get money. And it doesn't work like that. You know, you need to have a proven product or concept. You need to have a community of people that want to buy your product or concept. There are very few businesses that get funding pre-launch.
And I guess going back to what you said earlier about it being real, and female entrepreneurs particularly struggling with that confidence to make their business real. I guess funding actually is one of those steps where once you seek that external investment and you're accountable to somebody else, that's actually another step in making your business real and really demonstrating confidence in your concept.
Absolutely. And I think the kind of funding you take on dictates ultimately what's going to happen with your business, because if you are in a position where you're big enough that you're taking on VC funding, ultimately you're headed toward an exit. But if you want to run a business that, you know, a legacy business that stays in your family, or maybe that's something that your family members would come into, or you're happy with it ticking along at the size that it is, then, that's not suitable for you. And there are all sorts of different funding routes to go before people typically, I think of funding as, venture capital funding or, crowdfunding, or there are lots of other things that you can do in the run up to that. Bank loans, friends and family, the most common funding vehicle is friends and family.
Do you think that the access to funding has improved for female-founded businesses over the last few years?
I don't know if it's improved. I mean, unfortunately, less than 1% of VC funding or VC deals go to female-founded businesses or women-led businesses in the UK, which is a really shocking number. I think what has happened over the last few years is there's been a greater awareness around the funding gap and the access to funding for women. I think it's been spotlighted, it's been shouted out. I think those problems do still exist, but there's definitely far more awareness around the problem. And with awareness comes knowledge. So, I would say anyone to seek funding needs to build their knowledge around the process, be sure of what they want. And that includes also knowing your numbers, and I'm sure you've seen it. We've seen it on the likes of, Dragon's Den, which is obviously, been sliced and diced massively from an editing perspective. But you'll see those entrepreneurs that go in there when they're asked for their numbers and they're fumbling and they don't know. That's what it would be like when you got funding. You have to be on top of your numbers. You need to know all of those elements of your business off the back of your hand.
And Michelle, within the women's chapter community, what are the most common issues you see being raised, or your members asking for advice upon? What are the real trends you see in female-founded businesses? What sort of advice do they really seek out on a regular basis?
So a lot of the time in our masterminds, which is the best example, is we talk about exposure, how they can get mainstream PR exposure, because many of them are on funding routes. And that's a great way to prove that you have leverage, that you have a place in the market. So, which is, especially again, over the last 18 months, publications have really, struggled. And I think so it's challenging to get the right kind of PR coverage if you're not necessarily working with a PR agency on an ongoing basis. And I would also say access to grants, sharing information around the different vehicles of financial support that are around at the moment, where people might have had an existing revenue stream hit, they're trying to activate a new one, and they're looking for, obviously advice around bounce back loans, but also what other elements may be of interest to them. We've had some people talking about whether or not they're going to let go of their physical retail space in lieu of really investing in the e-commerce side of their business. So I think a lot of what we've spoken about over the last couple of years, and I would say those sort of trends, is people, really shaking things up and realizing that in order to survive the likes of COVID or anything else that might come along that we weren't prepared for, we need to be highly adaptable, and we need to be prepared to take leaps, try new things, face fear. So a lot of the time our discussions have been around supporting one another through those. And somebody saying, well, I've had a shop for 10 years. Actually, my business is doing better now than it did before. Do you think I really need my shop? And a lot of the time, I think the questions that people ask, they know the answers to them.
They just need that validation from somebody else.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's not necessarily needing somebody to tell you what to do. It's about somebody saying, like, we've got your back, and go for it. And if things go wrong, we'll be here for you, and and help you pick up the pieces.
So Michelle, you yourself obviously are an entrepreneur setting up the women's chapter. You saw a need and you created something to fill it. So what has been your biggest lesson that you've learned as an entrepreneur over the course of your career, that I guess maybe influences what you do, or that you most like to pass on to your other members as well?
Well, I think primarily it's that there are no rules. So that's my current kind of mantra for everything.
I like
But I've also learned that this concept of entrepreneurship, you know, it's a very broad concept, and there is space in there. There's room at the table for anyone who wants to have a go. And I, I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by incredible women in our community, and have some women who have, built and sold multiple businesses as part of our community, and are women that I can go to for advice or ask for help. And I spent a long time feeling like I was small fry, or that I was just kind of winging it, and not taking myself seriously, not backing myself. So I think that piece of advice that I had around backing yourself, take yourself seriously, put the fundamentals in place, those have all come out of my own experience of realizing that when I did do those things, I should have done them a lot sooner. And in fact, I probably would have been a lot more successful by this point if I had really taken a very strategic business approach instead of just doing something that I love. It's okay to build a business on your passion and do something that you love, but to make money. And I think this is something as well that many people feel they have trouble with: charging their worth, asserting themselves in terms of their time and the worth that their time holds. And that's been a learning process for me over the years, especially as a consultant. And as somebody who's very passionate about what I do, I reached a point, and I'll give you a little story. Admittedly, I was still kind of transitioning, and I've always had my consulting business, which in the beginning very much funded the women's chapter while it was building. And fortunately, I'm in a position that isn't the case anymore. But that was my bread and butter. And I found myself being in London and having kind of meetings all day, back-to-back meetings with different amazing female founders or people who were just starting out or wanted some advice, in these back-to-back coffee dates and meetings, and realizing that I would come away from a whole day of meetings and I wouldn't have earned a cent. And so I had to, have a really serious chat with myself and go, okay, you love what you do, but essentially you are expending all of this energy helping people, giving them advice, but you're not generating any money for your business, which essentially means it's not sustainable. And so it was a difficult position for me to be in, but I've now overcome that, and I've realized that it very much lent me to develop our offering. So thinking about, okay, a lot of these brands are bootstrapping or they don't have the funding. So how can they come and be part of a community where they can get a little bit of everything at a price point they can afford? And that led me to basically restructuring our whole business and our offering and how we operated, and going from being largely what started out as an events business to becoming a real movement and community for women in business. But it wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had to have that really difficult conversation with myself around, like, what are you doing this for? Yes, you do it because you love it, but ultimately we all have a finite amount of energy and resources, and we need to make sure we spend them well.
I think that's really solid advice. I think it does go back to the passion thing, but also if it's going to be sustainable, it also needs to be profitable. Most people have a mortgage to pay, bills to pay, and actually, if you're going to take that leap to making your business a success and something that you can do full time, it has to be within a model that actually is sustainable and ultimately profitable. So I think that's really, really very solid advice. Michelle, thank you so much for your time today. It's been fascinating hearing about the women's chapter and your story as to how you've got it to where it is today. I think everything you've said has just really echoed the importance of community and having a strong platform like the women's chapter. in any circumstance that would be important, but I think particularly now, both during and post COVID, it feels like it's even more important. So I think yes, what you're doing is vital, and I'm sure that all of your members are incredibly grateful that you identified that need back in 2014 and have taken it to where it is today.
Thank you very much for having me, Chris. It's always a delight to work with you guys, and I'm really, really honored that you invited me today. So thank you very much.